Dzień dobry Państwu. Mam przyjemność powitać Was na spotkaniu z reżyserami filmu Ogniem, pisane, duetem reżyserskim Rintu Thomas i Sushmitem Ghoszem. Ten film był sensacją festiwali. Jak część z Państwa wie, zdobył m.in. nagrodę specjalną jury dla filmu dokumentalnego oraz nagrodę publiczności na festiwalu Sundance. Ja nazywam się Ada Petriczko, jestem niezależną dziennikarką, piszę o prawach kobiet, przede wszystkim o prawach kobiet w Indiach. Przygotowuję właśnie książkę reporterską na ten temat. Jeżeli Państwo pozwolą, to teraz przerzucę się na angielski. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to the question and answer session with the directors of the film Rising with Fire, Rintu Thomas and Sushmit Ghosh. Hi there, guys.
Hi, Ada.
Hello.
Hi. So I just said that your film has been a sensation at the international documentary festivals. It won the special jury prize at the Sundance Film Festival and also the Audience Award at the same festival. My name is Ada Petriczko and I'm a journalist. I work as a freelance correspondent. I've been reporting on women's rights from the Indian subcontinent for the past 3 years. So my first question is actually about the background of Khabar Lahariya, the newspaper for which your protagonists work for, because we meet them in 2016, but actually the story of the newspaper is much longer. Could you tell me how it came about? How did a group of women manage to form a newspaper like that?
Well, in the region that the film is based in Uttar Pradesh, journalists would traditionally always mean a man. And so it was a social experiment where an NGO went into the space and trained a bunch of women in reporting their own stories. So the brief was, if you were to create a newsletter that you would want to produce, what would it look and sound like? And so the women were trained to professionally report on stories, and they created a newsletter and called it Mahila Dakia. When the NGO sort of moved out, the women really had tasted blood and they wanted to continue. And so some of the members of the NGO and the women collaborated to create Khabar Lahariya. And it started off as a 4-page newspaper. When we met them, they were around for about 15 years.
Yeah, they started off in 2002.
Yes.
So they've been around for 14 years when we met them.
And in different districts of Uttar Pradesh. And the moment we met them was an exciting cusp where they were debating of moving from print to digital. And in many ways, it felt like just the right entry point for their story.
Wow. And in one of the interviews with you guys that I've listened to, you said that some of the reporters were illiterate at the moment when they were starting the newspaper. That's even more impressive as to where they got now.
It's deeply linked to the context. Women are kept away from education, especially if you're Dalit women. Access to education is impeded by many obstacles as you're growing up as a young woman. So when we met the women at Khabar Lahariya, a lot of them were unlettered, a lot of them were semi-literate, but none of them, except for Meera in Kavita and the women who had just learned how to deal with technology, a majority of them had never seen a smartphone. So education at different levels is what we had encountered when we met them.
Wow. And did you knew instantly that this is a material for a full feature film?
I mean, we actually went for a 5-day recce shoot to Uttar Pradesh. And we were very lucky because we met them in Delhi and they sort of like, once they got a sense of what we were looking for, they were like, why don't you come to our office in Uttar Pradesh, because there's going to be a big meeting and maybe you should see what happens there. And incidentally, it was the meeting that you see in the film where Meera is making a pitch to the entire room to shift from print to digital. And that was literally our first day of filming. And as we were sitting there rolling our cameras, we knew that this was going to be a story that could not be told in the short form. And it was a story that demanded sort of like, feature sort of length version to it. And I think we were also very lucky that that day itself, we were able to sort of like boil down on our three characters, because they all come from such different personal contexts and histories, sort of like brought together, unified by this one vision of, a newspaper led by Dalit women reporting on stories that are important for our times.
Right. In 2018, the Thomson Reuters agency proclaimed India to be the most dangerous place to live as a woman. And of course, it's a huge generalization because India is a continent and not a country. But within that continent, UP is a place that is doubtless dangerous for women to live in, especially Dalit women. And so I think knowing that context, knowing how high are the levels of violence against women in UP, makes it for us even more impressive to see them go out and report on their stories. I was wondering, when I watched some of the scenes, do you think that your presence was kind of like a protective mechanism as well?
We get asked
that
question a lot, even when we were actually pitching the film, well, I think filmmaking in itself as a form, the fact that we exist with our cameras and are choosing a particular frame, there is an intervention, there's a disruption of reality, and we are very aware of what that means. In this case, it felt like we were getting protected because of the presence of our characters than the other way around. These are women who've been working in the region for more 15 years, which means their roots are very deep. They know how to work systems. They know how to make these negotiations on an everyday basis. They're interacting with power structures that are much beyond, what you can see on a surface level. So that kind of interaction has meant that there's a lot of credibility for them. And so when we were with them, that credibility was naturally offered to us. There were situations where things got tense and we were in extremely risky situations in illegal mines, in police stations, in spaces that are not very welcoming for women and for cameras. But in each of these situations, it was just amazing to see the art of negotiation that our protagonist just displayed. And we also consciously kept our crew very, very lean. So our initial ideas of what the original crew and the equipment would be, like after the recce shoot, it all went away. It was just the three of us, Sushmit, me, and our co-cinematographer, Karan. We were managing all our roles, and the equipment had to fit in a backpack because we were constantly traveling through the day. The idea was to become like a one unit and be with them wherever they go. So the answer to that is no, it was the opposite.
True, it is. In so many of the scenes, the reporters would be literally the only women present in the scene, right? And I think in that sense, your film is also about being a woman in spaces that are designed to keep women out. And the masculinization of public sphere in India is quite deeply rooted in the traditions, right? I mean, a woman's sphere is traditionally the home and not the outside world. And how did you try to portray? I mean, was it difficult to portray that tension between the ambitions of the women and the expectations of the family to keep them in the house? Was that a constant struggle?
That's an interesting question, actually. I think we knew very early on that this was going to be a film that was going to be talking about many themes, right? From gender and patriarchy all the way to, journalism and media freedom. And how do you sort of layer these complexities into something that is going to be contained in 90 minutes? I mean, for instance, like one of the big challenges was, how do you explain the caste system to an international audience? Because an Indian audience would get it, but how do you nuance it for someone who has no idea what it's about? Because the entire story, if you do not know what the caste system is, then the story sort of falls on its heads. And I think one of the most important things for us, of course, was to look at where the newspaper was going as an institution. Would they be able to make this switch from print to digital successfully? But I think our heart was in actually looking at this journey through the interior lives of Meera, Sunitha, and Shamkali, because it was through their hopes and their dreams and their fears that we knew that we would be able to tell the story most intimately. And I feel that, you know, a lot of times in mainstream media in India, the portrayal of the Dalit community has typically been one of victims. And we definitely wanted to break away from that stereotypical positioning of, you know, a Dalit woman's body as a body that is always a site of violence, because you see that in the film, but you also see the journalists actually chipping away at a millennia worth of patriarchy through the work that they're doing. And they're doing it in the most profound manner because, you know, for privileged filmmakers like Rintu and me, who spend most of our lives in cities, have had, you know, access to all kinds of resources, education, and an opportunity at a good shot at life, it's very enraging to see when the system doesn't work, right? And it's very easy to get angry, but to see people like Meera, who have generationally been at the bottom of the social pyramid in India, actually changing that conversation through the work they do day in and day out, I think that was the essence of what we wanted to do with the film. And we knew that that was going to be the soul of the film, which would drive it forward. So, you know, that's exactly why we went into their personal lives the way we did, and then kept switching between the bigger picture and what's happening. You know, it was tricky, but, you know.
It was an edit nightmare, it was.
Right. You know, one of the quotes that have stuck in my mind have been, I never expected them to achieve anything. It's something that Meera's husband says at the beginning. And of course, it's ironical when we know the future, but, you know, the past usually makes sense only when we look at it in retrospect. So like you said, them going out to do it daily, just putting in work without knowing whether it's ever gonna have any fruits. How did you see? I mean, did you see the attitudes of men around them, the husbands, the fathers, evolve as you've been watching them for over 4 years?
It was complex, and we didn't want to simplify it at all. The men in the lives of all our characters had this sort of silent resistance, and sometimes not so silent resistance, but also an acceptance that I can't stop her from doing this. And that comes from the conversations and the choices that the women have made in their lives all these years. For Meera, and that has meant that there has been financial independence for these women, and that means that women who've been kept out of critical discussions and decisions at home and are now at the center of those. It has meant that they're able to have conversations that you wouldn't otherwise have about education of their children, about should our daughters be married or not. So, and that its sphere of influence keeps getting enlarged from your extremely private relationship with your father, brother, husband, to your larger families, to your extended families, to your sisters. And that has been, you know, it's not a black and white. And we were very conscious that we didn't want to present any of the male characters as absolutely villains to, like, you know, the anti-force to the force that women represented. And Sunitha's father actually is a rock star for us, because here's a man who's his entire life worked as a daily wage laborer, got his own daughter educated, and of all the children that he got educated, it's Sunitha who flies, and he's always believed in the strength of her dreams. He inhabits this very dichotomic space of, I would love to give strength and to my daughter's ambitions, but I also know that we need to get her married. And how do you balance these two very different worlds, which is her life? And it's this complexity, it's that is what we were really interested in, because that's what real people do, right? We don't make the decisions that are right or wrong. We make them and then we figure out what's going to happen after that based on our belief systems.
Right. And I think what you said at the beginning, I can't keep her out. That is a progress in itself, right?
Yeah.
In a way, because there's, I reckon, 50 years ago, he would be able to keep her out of it, right? And then Sunitha's father, like you said, he also faces the system, which is extremely discriminatory, right? I mean, the dowry system, which is also one of the themes, albeit secondary in the film. I mean, it's really brutal in the sense that, Sunitha can either get married to a husband that will allow her to work, but that will cost so much to her family that it's just not possible to do. But, this is actually something I've been wondering, because Sunitha makes a comeback in the movie. Could you say a little bit more about that? How did that happy end come about?
I mean, when we heard that she was considering or contemplating not being a journalist anymore, we sort of, heart of hearts, didn't want to believe it, because, Sunitha is literally a force of nature, like in more ways than one. And I think that even Mira was both shocked and, we had this conversation. She was like, I don't see her quitting. How is that even a possibility, right? But we were all approaching it from different positions, and we stayed quiet about it. Nobody talked about it because it was this awkward sort of elephant in the room that nobody wanted to address. And I mean, you can't keep Sunitha away from journalism. It's something that she says that I was born to do this. And she's back with, more vengeance than ever. And the last year has been one of her strongest, one of Khabar Lahariya's strongest years. And she's been instrumental to a lot of things that have happened for them on the ground in Uttar Pradesh.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So then she managed to persuade her husband. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, more than that. I mean, she's, again, one of the things that has been a big learning for us is the art of negotiation, both in the public and the private sphere. And how, so basically during the pandemic, public transportation completely stalled all across India. So she managed to convince her husband to sort of take her to these places in the field from where she could report from. And in the course of doing that, she trained him in the using of a mobile camera and encouraged him to start his own YouTube channel. And now he has his own YouTube channel where he's actually reporting news from the field. So while she's working, he's also doing his own thing on the side. And she's smart like that. She's made, I mean, we could have continued filming, to be very honest, and incorporated that into Writing with Fire. But, yeah, Sunitha is amazing.
Wow. Well, exactly. How do you even stop? How do you decide we have enough material in a story like that?
I think part of it was the pandemic. We had given ourselves till the end of 2019 because a lot of strands that we were following, especially in the personal lives, were coming together. We had contemplated, we had started off thinking it's going to be a 2-year project, and then, another year. And so by the beginning of 2019, which was the 4th year, we knew that certain things were falling into place. And then right in the beginning of 2020, the pandemic hit. And we felt like maybe the timing is absolutely perfect in a bizarre way.
Sure. But something that may not be so clear to the Polish audience is the issue of the caste, of course. And can we talk a little bit more about that? About the influence of caste discrimination on the life and work of your protagonists, because they face multiple layers of discrimination. It's not easy to be a woman anywhere. It's not easy to be a woman in the media, and it's definitely not easy to be a woman Dalit in the media.
So, I mean, very briefly, the caste system is a, a way of reordering society into four castes, primary castes, which is sort of like a pyramid structure. And it sort of like philosophically takes its roots in the ancient Hindu scriptures. And the complexity of it is that within these castes, there are many subcastes and multiple categories, right? And at the top of the order is the Brahmanical order, or the priests, or the learned folks, and then you have the warriors or the kings, and then the traders, and then the lowest castes. The Dalit community is considered so impure that they have historically always been treated as outsiders or pariahs from the caste system. And so when India gained independence in 1947, and with the constitution being established, the practice of caste was formally banned by the constitution. But how do you sort of, get rid of something that has been endemic to especially North Indian society for, a millennia? And so in many parts of Uttar Pradesh, we found that it is practiced with a vengeance. And these are the parts, incidentally, where Khabar Lahariya is most active in as well. And so to be a Dalit is, you're literally at the bottom of India's social hierarchy. But to add complexity to that, if you're a Dalit woman, you have literally nothing going for you. So it is in this context that, the work of Khabar Lahariya becomes even more profound from what they're doing and what institutionally they represent. The fact that you have an institution that is led primarily by Dalit women, by Muslim women, or women from tribal communities who are actually, shining a light in the darkness, so to speak, especially in a media landscape in the country, which is very skewed. Mainstream media in India is extremely polarized right now. It's almost a circus. There are very, very few independent outlets left that are actually, catering to the true values of what journalism or the fourth estate is. And Khabar Lahariya actually is one of them. And what makes it phenomenal is that the journalists are all Dalit women, or women from minority communities. So they have everything going against them. They have had historically, socially, politically, economically, and yet they are not just representing the voice of their community. They are actually speaking true to the ideals of journalism, shining a light on the truth for all Indians, right? So they report on issues ranging from, as you see in the film, from public health to the safety and security of women to, political discourse in the country. And I think that is what makes their work so special. And I feel that is one of the reasons why audiences globally are also responding so strongly to Meera, Sunitha, and Shamkali's characters, because they have everything going against them, and yet they're fighting the good fight and coming out with shining colors.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important what she said about how they're not just reporting on their community. There's this one brilliant scene in the film where Meera is like, she's walking down the street and she's like, where's the real news? Nobody reports on the real news anymore. It's just politics. And I just agree with her so much. She keeps on looking for the stories that can actually make an impact, that she can really change something with, and you capture that so beautifully. But something that is a very strong theme in the movie is the rise of Hindu nationalism in India, and the fear that we can see in the women that their newly gained freedom, for example, the ability to work outside of the home, may be hindered by what's happening politically. How did you see that evolve?
Inequality, and you can chime in, is not new. The skewed nature of power is not new to these journalists and these women. And they've historically always worked in a space where power structures have always been stacked against them. And so we were having this chat with Meera and a couple of her colleagues the other day. And one of the things they said was, it was always, the power structures have always stacked against us. It's just that the urban middle class educated India has now walked into that conversation, and therefore for you it's feeling like you're feeling the heat even more, but for us it was always like this. And yes, the specifics have changed, but so we know our toolkit is ready, we know how to manage this and that I found was really the most amazing, insightful way of looking at the situation and continuing to do the work that they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of also like a global trend, this rise of authoritarian governments and leaders. And interestingly, how that rise also in large parts has been fueled by big data companies, and how social media has been used as a weapon of, designing hate amongst the masses, and that is something that we also as storytellers found very fascinating really early on, when we were beginning this project, was how is the internet still an ambivalent place, in the sense that can data be used in a way where it could be like this mythical weapon of choice of a community that has always been marginalized. So you have these old traditions meeting this new technology, and what happens when they clash with each other. And I think interestingly, what's essentially happened is that with societies becoming more cordoned off with the pandemic, institutions and journalists across the world, including Khabar Leheria, have actually shown us that there is a way to fight the good fight, and they've used the tools of the internet, the very weapons that these very political parties and leaders have used, in a very different way. And I think that it begs this conversation around, it's like fire. It can be used to burn a house down or cook your food. And, it depends on what the perspective is and what the intent is.
Absolutely. But there is something that I've wondered, as, the women, when the newspaper is transitioning to digital, there's a lot of reservations and fear amongst the women, and it made me think about face recognition systems, for example, and the reporters were learning how to use their phone with such zeal, and then again, how do they learn to balance out the threats and benefits of that? I mean, do they in living in a country or in a world actually where face recognition can be used as a tool for surveillance, how do they walk that thin line, I guess?
They were very aware of this upsurge having many this undercurrent of danger and risk of a completely different kind with the digital space. So what happened first off was their popularity soared. So till now, like, people knew them by their names, but now by their faces. That meant that, like, greater confidence for all the journalists, but also that the more people knew about them, that became a way of establishing their space in the media space. So it wasn't as if, like, they were just like nobodies, some women doing something cute and could be then distorted. That they grew very organically, and that meant that the credibility of their presence as print journalists got converted into this digital space. And then the dangers that lurk there, they addressed it very, very smartly as and when they encountered them. So there are a lot of team meetings that Khabar Leheria has constantly, where they're sharing resources, they're getting trained. For instance, in the case of trolling, when you and I get trolled, we get comments of people who don't agree with us, and the language would be aggressive, but we don't know who these folks are or what these handles are. We're in that way physically distant from our trolls, vis-a-vis in their case where their troll could be their neighbor or someone who lives in their village and knows what bus they're going to take and where they're going to stop for their lunch. The troll knows your address and your husband's name. So that kind of proximity to danger, so the digital sort of like permeates, is always in constant touch with the non-digital, so to speak. And in their strategy is to use social media to do what they have to, and if there are attacks, to respond to them as a team. And that's kept them soaring so far.
No, I mean, one of the other things that we also saw was that they have very smartly built alliances within these systems as well. So there are a lot of officers within the administration who are very silent supporters of Khabar Lahariya. And so, these are sort of like protective, invisible protective functions to the work that they're doing. And to an earlier question that you asked, how have the men responded? Something that we witnessed in the 5 years that we were on the ground was, for instance, the male journalists in the beginning when they were making the shift to digital. It was just, it was a very dismissive sort of attitude in terms of what are you going to do with digital, right? And when we went for the last shoot schedule, it was more about, can you share your news stories with us because you seem to have all the information and we should collaborate. So there was this huge spectrum shift in attitude as well. And so there is a lot of respect for the work that they are doing within the journalistic establishment in the region, of course, on ground amongst the citizenry, and silently so within the establishment itself. So I think these are these multiple layers of, protection that come with the work that they're doing.
And it's something that you've mentioned before, because I'm wondering about privilege. When you went to shoot with them, being more, as you said, more privileged than they are. I mean, were there issues that you were finding difficult to really understand or portray, or find a way to portray them in a way that felt really honest and kind of hands down?
We were very conscious of the privilege that we were bringing into the lens that we had chosen, like as filmmakers. And I think the first step for us was to acknowledge that and say, okay, this is not my story, but this is a story. The protagonists are people whose value systems that we align with at their very core. And then our job was to present it most authentically. And we saw the film and our role as filmmakers to be those of amplifiers. And change is such a long battle. We all want to see change, but how invested are we in the mechanics of it? And to show up on an every single day to report on a story that wouldn't be reported if a journalist from Khabar Lahariya wasn't doing it. That's the cue that we took. So, as allies, as people who want to amplify the story, that's the position that we took while filming, while doing the pre-production, and while editing the film. So you were constantly checking in and seeing, this is such an intersectional film. Are all the layers sort of coming across in a way that the dignity and the courage of the women is at the heart of the story? Is it getting communicated? And that was really our conversation that we had with the entire crew throughout. And I think the fact that our protagonists sort of love the film is a litmus test that we have
we're very happy about, because we're very nervous showing them the film, because these are women who will tell us on our faces, this is rubbish, we don't agree with this. Especially people like Meera and Sunitha, who make no bones about it. So when they watched the film, and their reaction to the film, was elevated in the sense we didn't expect that to happen. And so that's where we knew that, it's absolutely hit the right notes. So, yeah.
And did that kind of visibility they get for the film, when it's being screened all over the world, did it influence their work in any way?
It's too early to say, and especially right now, in the way the film is premiering, it's still in the process. But we've tried to be together on panels and Q&As whenever possible, and just the response of people and the kind of questions that they want to know from Meera, Sunitha, and Shamkali. It's a very enriching process for everyone involved, and we hope that the film is able to spotlight their work in a larger way, so that there are more collaborations, more interest in their work, and a lot more value can be created there.
And what did you learn from them on personal level? Because when I was watching the film, I was thinking that, I get cynical about journalism, as many people that work in journalism, and they just are so pure in their motives and in their zeal and in their belief in the power of change that an article that is well reported can bring about. So I think that's something that I'm taking away from the film. What about you guys?
I think for me, it's hope is a choice. And that I get disheartened when you see, especially when I see injustice, inequity. I want to fight it, but most of the time I'm just like, how am I going to change this? And get exhausted and get enraged. But I think choosing hope on an everyday basis and to lead your life on the basis of that is my biggest takeaway from the whole process of knowing these women.
I think for me, it's something that I have constantly sort of thought about, especially in the last few years, has been the value of freedom and what that means at an individual level. Because you read about it in your textbooks, and that, constitutionally you guaranteed the right to speech, the right to live, and how now those very basic fundamental rights are being threatened. And how do you then do the work that you do and continue to create value in your everyday life, not only for yourself, but for your community and for your people? And I think that having seen women like Meera and Sunitha and Shamkali do this despite the biggest awards is essentially what Rintu said, hope is a choice. So, to never give up, because it's very easy to be cynical and so much more difficult to be hopeful. And that's what they've taught me.
My last question is kind of inevitable. I'm wondering, how has the COVID catastrophe in India affected the lives and the work of the reporters?
It's been a huge roller coaster. 2020 was their busiest year, and they formed a lot of alliances and collaborations because they were reporting from the ground. I think their biggest contribution so far has been in the way that, again, they've looked at news even at this time, because when the scale of catastrophe is still not known to all of us in its entirety, actually. So yet the big numbers and the data coming in are from cities and the urban centers, but they've been keeping their lens focused on rural India, where reporting has been very slow, and looking at villages that are anyway off the grid. And this time of a pandemic, how are basic amenities reaching there, using their portal of news to sort of to amplify the voices of these communities, looking at domestic violence that has gone up during this period, looking at quarantine centers and saying, are these equipped for women? looking at mental health of women. So this is the kind of reporting that I've been doing, which has typically been the privilege of the urban stories. You're not looking at mental health of rural women in India. That's a stretch of imagination. But when you see it reported in a way that's powerful and easily accessible, then you know that's an important conversation that needs to be. So it's been a huge gamut of work. They're constantly in the middle of this crisis, doing what they best know how to do.
Well, thank you so much for the conversation. I wish they could have been here with us, but I know that they are, that their workload is just immense. It was a great pleasure, and congratulations once again on the film.
Absolutely. What a pleasure to talk to you, Ada. Thank you.
Thank you.